Hi everyone. I just wanted to go over the Essay 1 requirements for this course. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. We know exactly what it is that we have to do for this essay, and we know how to proceed since we only do meet once a week. Okay, so I want to go over this document with you. Essentially, what I'm going to ask you to do for this essay is to write on Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour. We are all writing on the same short story for this essay. Unfortunately, there is no choice in that matter. We are all sticking with this same story because I want to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as research goes, as far as our analysis goes. And if all of us have really thought through this story really closely, then you'll be able to help one another as far as analysis in your peer reviews and then just in everyday class discussion if you have time to meet before or after class to talk about your essays. Um, so we're going to be working with Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour. What I'd like us to do for this essay is to focus on either setting, point of view, or character development. There will be videos for each of these things as well, so you can see what's going on with each of them, what they mean, how you can apply them to your short story. Um, but what you'll want to do is choose one of these three literary elements and show, if you choose setting, how does setting interact with the information in the story of an hour? What does the setting tell you about that story? If you choose point of view, you'll want to think about how this is written, what perspective this is written from, and how that really impacts what the reader understands about the story. Or if you want to focus on character development, you'll want to kind of think about the development of the character. I know that sounds self-explanatory, but what I mean by that is you can see how a character grows, how a character changes, even in a short story that's as short as the story of an hour. Okay, and that change or that stagnation, depending on what you see, tells you a lot about that particular character and about the story more generally. So you'll have to focus on one of these three literary elements, and you'll focus on them in reference to the story of an hour. Okay, for this essay, you're going to utilize two secondary sources as well. These sources must be scholarly. Okay, they should be written by someone who's an expert in the field of literature. That's really what it means when it comes to finding scholarly sources. Okay, I'll go a little bit more in depth into that later. I want you to remember that the essay is analytical. It's not a summary. Highlight it so that we don't forget. It is not a summary. I don't need a retelling of the story. I've read it. Your peers have read it. Everybody in class has read it, hopefully. If you haven't read it, please don't tell me. Okay, just read it. Um, so you don't need a summary. Don't retell the story, but assume your reader has read it, because we have, and only share details that are pertinent to your analysis. Okay, you don't want to leave out details from the short story because you're like, oh, they'll be able to figure it out, or they'll be able to figure out where this information is from. No, put in things that you know that you're going to discuss, but you don't want to retell the whole story in the intro, for example, right? Just those necessary details for you to be able to kind of focus on what you need to. Okay, so your essay is going to include 2+ type pages of analysis. When I say 2+ type pages, what I mean is you will have 2 pages of analysis at least. Your ideas interacting with your source's ideas. The works cited page that you'll be required to include is not contained in that 2 type pages of analysis. That is an additional page. The analysis is what I need to see in 2 or more pages. Okay, again, you'll be working with Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour, and you will include 2 scholarly sources that address the story of an hour. Okay, you can agree with these, you can resist them, you can completely disagree with them. It's just up to you to identify why you react to these sources in this way, right? If they're helping your argument, very cool, that'll be clearly visible. If you feel like they are working against your argument, sometimes bringing them up can be helpful. Think the counter argument from English 1101, right, from that argumentative essay. Sometimes you can develop analysis a little bit more based on difference, right? Why is it that you feel that analysis is incorrect, but yours is correct? Okay, so you can go a few different ways with that. And then, like I said before, you have to include an MLA works cited page. Now, your essay should contain the following paragraphs, right? It should contain an introduction that has a clearly defined thesis statement. When I say a clearly defined thesis statement, I mean one that indicates the short story that you're working with, so the story of an hour. That includes the literary element that you're focusing on and how you will be dissecting that literary element. right? So it needs to have those elements in your thesis statement. If you want to see like a kind of template, like a rough template of what you'll want your thesis statement to look at, you can take a peek at the thesis statement assignment that happens later on. You can find that in the weekly modules. Just go into short stories and essay one, and then scroll down until you see essay one thesis statement. Okay, and that will have a guideline. You can deviate from that, but you need to contain, or the thesis needs to contain that information. Okay, your body paragraphs then have to contain good development. Well, what does good development mean? Well, it means that you need to make an assertion and then you back it up with examples. So in this case, quotations or paraphrases from the story and from your scholarly sources. Okay, you need to have at least 6 quotations or paraphrases present in the essay, but you need to have at least one of each. I want to see that you can use quotations effectively, and I want to see that you can use paraphrases effectively. Also, each time you quote or paraphrase, you'll want to include in-text citations that document where your reader can find the data that you're talking about. Okay, that's a big thing. Your reader needs to be able to find it, and you need to be able to give credit to your source. And then a conclusion paragraph that restates the information from your essay, but not word for word from your thesis or anywhere else, right? You'll want to restate it in a way that seems fresh, even though you're offering a reminder. Um, and you want to make sure that your reader feels contented. Don't include any new information in your conclusion paragraph. This needs to be straight up, um, repeated information. It's just repeated artfully so that your reader isn't like, ugh, we're reading this again. We already talked about this. Yes, but you need to say it in a new, compelling way. Um, when you're using information from your primary and secondary sources, you have to use at least 3 quotations from your primary source. Okay, I need to see 3 quotes from your primary source. It is, in this case, the story of an hour. Okay, you will probably quote your primary source more than 3 times. Okay, um, it's just probably going to happen because that's what you're interacting with. And in fact, if you don't, there's probably something wrong. Okay, but you need to have at least 3 quotations from your primary source. And there needs to be at least 6 quotations or paragraphs or paraphrases, apologies, throughout the essay. So you have to use at least 1 paraphrase and 1 quotation, right? Remember, like I said before. Remember that all quotations and paraphrases need to be cited following MLA formatting. And I'm going to say that a million times throughout the term because MLA formatting and citation methods are really, really important. Okay, we need to give credit where it's due. As far as quoting or paraphrasing information, you'll want to use the quote sandwich method. We'll talk about this a little bit more in depth, I believe, in another video. And what you'll want to do is introduce your quotation or paraphrase. So something as simple as John Smith indicates, boom, John Smith's the author of a secondary source. Or as Mrs. Mallard is doing this thing, then what? What happens, right? Mrs. Mallard is the protagonist from the story of an hour. Okay, something to introduce your quotation to let your reader know that you're giving them information. The quotation or paraphrase that you want to use would then come next, and then you offer an explanation of your quotation or paraphrase and how you're using it to be sure your reader understands exactly what you expect them to do with it. Okay, you don't ever want to leave anything up to the reader because the reader may make a mistake, okay, and misinterpret what you're trying to say. Now, you'll want to utilize at least 2 secondary sources in your essay, like we talked about before. Please don't use secondary sources like Schmoop, Cliff's Notes, Spark Notes, eNotes, anything like that. Any of those just standard Google sources, you want to avoid using those, just for the fact that they're typically written by people who are not experts in the field. They're written to help understand, but not necessarily to analyze further. Okay, even when they say they're attempting to analyze further. So make sure that you don't just utilize any sort of source that you find on the internet. Make sure you use Galileo to find your sources. And there's information for how to use Galileo in the tips and tricks for our course folder in term materials. So make sure you check that out. Okay, those secondary sources have to be either paraphrased or quoted and must be cited using MLA formatting. I want to make sure really quickly to indicate that you have to use 2 scholarly sources and your primary source in some form in your essay. Okay, they can't just be in your works cited page, you have to be in the body of your essay. Now, your essay also needs to be written to the following standards. It has to be in third person point of view. You don't want to say, I believe this thing, I think, anything like that. You want to make sure that this is nice and direct and that your reader can um, easily understand that, well, one, if you're writing it, you believe it, right? But also it makes it more universal to say one may interpret or the reader may understand. And it's more convincing that way. If you're trying to convince someone of something and you say the reader may understand, the reader is anybody reading this story, right? So it's this idea that, any reader could get this. Okay, so you want to do that to make your argument more compelling. And then you want to make sure that you use literary present in your essays. What does that mean? Well, that means that you are writing as if everything that you are writing about, so your primary source, your secondary sources, those are in the present tense. Okay, everything that you're reading is being read in this exact moment, so you don't want to write about it as if it happened in the past. You want to write about it because you can look down at the page right now and you can see what it says. Right? Same thing for your scholarly sources. You can look down at your page, you can look at your computer and read the article right now. So write about it as if it's happening right now. Okay. Your essay should also follow the following format. It should be double spaced, following 12-point Times New Roman font throughout. Okay. There should be no extra spacing anywhere. That's not on this list, but it's something to consider. You have to include a works cited page that includes all primary and secondary sources consulted for the essay. So if you use the information in your essay, there should be a citation for it. That works cited page needs to be alphabetized and correctly formatted following MLA formatting. Now, you also need to include a header that contains your last name and page number. The reason that this has its own bullet point is because people tend to forget it. Please make sure that you insert that header in the header of the document. If you're unsure how to do this, check out the document formatting a paper in MLA in tips and tricks for our course. That'll show you how to do it. Okay. There are other things that need to be included as well, so definitely check out that document, things like a heading, a title, all of these things that are explicitly indicated in that document. Now, as far as Turnitin goes, you can resubmit as many times as you'd like before the deadline. Okay, if you make revisions, make sure that you change it. You submit something, you realize, oh my gosh, I forgot that one thing. Well, make the adjustment, resubmit. Now, keep in mind too that you can view your similarity report before the deadline happens, which means if you submit your document early, you can check it out and see if there's any paraphrases that you actually didn't change your any of the source language. If that happens, then you need to put it in quotations, right? If you're using an idea and language from a source, it means you need a quote instead of a paraphrase. So you need to make sure it's in quotation marks. It would show you if something comes word for word from the internet, okay, or from a source. So you want to make sure that you utilize all the tools that we have to make sure that you don't unintentionally plagiarize, okay? Let's see. Just a reminder of how to cite sources as far as in-text citations go. Since we're working with a short story, the way that this would go is that you've got the author's last name and the page number in parentheses at the end of the sentence in which your quotation or paraphrase is found. It doesn't go in the middle of the sentence. It doesn't go directly after the quotation. It goes at the end of the sentence. And then the period for the sentence goes after the in-text citation. You can remember this because the in-text citation is actually part of your sentence. It's a clarification of the information present in your sentence. Okay, and your works cited page should include citations for all sources quoted or paraphrased within your essay. I know I said that before, but people often forget to include the primary source, for example, because it's so obvious. We're working with the story of an hour the whole time, right? But it needs to also be in the works cited page. Okay, and then there's just a definition of essay elements that you may want to refer back to, which is essentially your primary source. It's the piece of literature that you are analyzing, and your secondary source is information written about that primary source. All right, so I believe that's everything that you need to know for Essay 1, except for clarification on setting, point of view, and character development. There'll be videos about those coming up soon. So we can definitely get that started. Now, keep in mind, we do have a topic selection assignment coming up, or primary source selection, which is basically just going to be a Word document that includes Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour. It's kind of gimme points, because we're all working on the same one. I know what you're working on, but you get 5 points in the grade book for submitting. So Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour, and then 2 to 3 sentences about what you'd like to write about for it. Okay, so this is just a general idea. You can change it if you decide that you don't love it anymore. But I want to get some ideas down on paper. Now, that means that you need to read the story before you submit your primary source selection. So, even if you just skim it over, that'll be totally fine. You don't have to go in-depth analysis if you want to get this done early. Okay. So if you have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to email me, come by my office, just let me know. Something doesn't seem right or you're confused about something, and I'm happy to help you. Okay. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Do awesome things, and I will see you in class.